Lately, it has come under a bit of a strain. Distortions have set in. Elections, which are intended as a mechanism for the expression of popular choice, are seen more and more to deviate from that purpose, with the results of elections being determined by disproportionate role by money power and muscle power. In the result, criminals in larger and larger numbers are getting into elected bodies. A thoroughgoing electoral reform is the need of the hour. Can we take recourse to direct democracy instead? People directly making and unmaking laws and recalling elected representatives whose performance is considered unsatisfactory? Welcome to Public Forum. Today we talk about the feasibility and advisability of direct democracy in some form in our system of governance. And to discuss the same, we have with us in the studio an eminent panel of guests. Please welcome to the program Professor Ashwin Ray, a noted political scientist. Sitting next to him is Professor C. Rajkumar, a Vice Chancellor with O.P. Jindal Global University. And we're also joined by M.R. Madhavan, a Head of Research with PRS Legislative Research. I welcome you all to Public Forum. So the idea does not seem too far-fetched, considering elements of direct democracy are already part of the existing systems of governance in some countries of the world. We'll begin the discussion on this with Professor Rajkumar. Would you agree with Professor Ray's views that it is going to be impractical to apply it on such a large scale, such as in a country like ours?
Well, I think we should just a little bit step back to really understand why are we even discussing this. The fact of the matter is Indian citizenry is indeed facing a certain degree of lack of legitimacy on the part of the power holders. They are increasingly dissatisfied with the democratic process of elections, and of course rule of law is indeed undermined in various forms. So it is indeed a good discussion. It's important for us to think about how to sort of improve the content of the democracy and how to strengthen its institutions. And I'm also conscious of the fact that things have dramatically changed due to technological innovation in the very process and conduct of elections. For example, a few decades back, the idea of electronic voting machines and the idea of a large country like India, the process of elections could take place in this form. It continues to face some challenges, but I'm confident that the idea of direct democracy is not very far away, particularly in the sense of infusing certain components into it. Professor Ray just mentioned about the idea of referendum. I don't think it is extremely difficult for us to move towards certain aspects of the decision-making process brought into the referendum framework. In fact, there are a number of countries around the world which have infused it. Both the legal and constitutional process have required it. For example, constitutional amendments in Australia, Japan, Uruguay, as well as Switzerland cannot be passed without referendum. And I think, and there are a number of other countries where it is, although it may not be mandated by the constitution, there is provision for initiating a referendum to ensure, to kind of provide for a certain degree of legitimacy in the decision-making process. So, and as far as recall is concerned, we are already trying recall in some of the Nagar Palikas and some aspects within the sort of democratic decentralization process. But I think we should seriously look at examining these issues, and there is need to critically analyze as to how we can move forward with a view to sort of perfecting the democratic process.
But Professor Rajkumar, one of the objections, as Professor Ray also mentioned, is of course the difficulty of applying it on a large scale where the electorate runs into millions.
Sure.
And of course the sheer expense that it is going to involve.
Absolutely. I think one of the things we have to, these are competing values and principles that we need to assess if the entire process of elections as well as democracy is threatened by the fact that people no longer have faith in the process. I don't think India has reached that state, because if you look at the number of voters turning into elections, there is still a very strong sense of belief and faith in the electoral process. Unlike Japan, for example, there is historically the electoral turnout in Japan has been reducing because people are the people's interest and fascination in the process of elections is dwindling. But that's not the case in India. But at the same time, I would say that because of the fact that there is a stronger sense of social expectations from the sort of political power holders, there is a need to infuse accountability in that process. And if direct democracy or certain components of direct democracy in the form of, say, citizen initiatives or referendums or the right to recall is infused into the current process, we can hope that the people may have a better set of, faith and legitimacy.
So there's always scope for improvement, always room for some evolution.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm reasonably sure that the Election Commission is looking at various options, and there is debate about it. Even, for example, the idea of negative voting, that was considered completely sort of not worth even thinking about, but there is a lot more discussion about it in more recent times.
All right, a quick response from
Well, my own opinion on these matters is that we need to, just because it is difficult to operationalize it and to institutionalize it, it's not good enough a reason for not exploring it. In fact, he mentioned about the whole idea of the concept of or the practice of booth capturing and the very conduct of criminals in the electoral process. We have significantly moved into a process which is far more fair and reasonable. Now, if you look at Estonia, for example, it's one of the smallest countries, and they've used internet voting as an important way by which you could have the electoral process. I think it is time for us to explore all these possibilities, not only because of the faith or the increasing lack of faith on the part of the Indian citizenry on the elected representatives, but more importantly, if you look at the sort of work of the parliamentarians themselves. We have a clear record of how parliamentary functioning has been disrupted, which has affected the lawmaking process.
Right. So, Professor Rajkumar, the new system or direct democracy is being talked about because of the distortions or excrescences that have developed in the present system, and to bring in more transparency and accountability, as you mentioned earlier. So, it is about time that we talk about direct democracy.
I think absolutely. I mean, for example, the issue of referendum should be more. We should seriously consider using it. Of course, on selected issues which is of great relevance for the country. And in fact, we must also note that even one of the oldest democracies in the world, United States of America, which actually sort of even in its founding documents, including the Declaration of Independence, there was a very clear recognition that they adopted the representative democracy model and expressly rejected the idea of direct democracy, although they debated about it. But then, in the last several years of its functioning, several aspects of direct democracy have been infused into the functioning of US in different states within America. So the point is, we should not hesitate to infuse those models into our own electoral process. And one is the question of referendum. I would also like to argue that the issue of right to recall should used more often. For example, 5 years is a long time in today's context for a power holder to be able to exercise power and essentially make their contribution. There should be provision for creating a framework whereby if there is sufficient number of votes or popular will among the elected, among the constituency members of the constituency, it is possible to recall an elected representative. Obviously, all of this involves both legal as well as constitutional amendments or even legislative changes, but I think there is need for a stronger debate. Now, unfortunately, this debate is not going to happen in the parliament because may not be in the best interest of many of the parliamentarians themselves. So it is absolutely essential that civil society as well as media should take up these issues as we are discussing.